Happy politics and welcome to the best part of your Tuesday. This is BC Poly Hot Stove. My name's Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Orca, and I'm joined in a socially distant manner by
Jordan Bateman, VP Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association. And yes, it is the best part of my Tuesday because we get to spend some time with Czech TV star, Orca editor, Maclean K.
Oh, it's true. It's true. And Jordan, before we delve into our usual topics here on BC Poly Hot Stove, I first want to start with something on the ice. A superstar performance that is worthy of song and praise. An unstoppable force on the ice. The opposition had absolutely no chance against him. I'm referring, of course, to Vladimir Putin, who scored 8 goals yesterday in a dominant effort against whoever they were playing.
My God,
Joe. In a decisive role in a 13-9 win, all of which I was totally aware of before this show. And wow, what else can you say other than marvel at that and the majesty of that kind of commanding physical performance in his advanced years?
It's incredible. I wish the Canucks could afford to bring him over to center the third line. Pardon me, 8 goals a game, the first line. I know that Joe Malone was sweating in his grave, worried that his NHL record of 10 goals would be broken in the whatever league it is that Vladimir Putin plays in. He is truly the Daryl Sittler of Russian hockey.
He is. Did he wear a helmet? Or I mean, like,
he wore a helmet. He wore a helmet. I only saw a highlight of one goal. And basically, it was the entire team feeding him in the slot. Some would say the low bumper position, and he missed once. And then the whole team worked again to feed him. And I can't believe it. Like, talk about defensive breakdowns. I mean, the defense just basically left him completely open, wide open in the slot. Finally banks it in past the goalie, who seemed to be scrambling out of the way at one point of the shot. I'm not sure. It's almost like their life depended on this, letting these goals go in.
Almost like their life depended on it.
Very odd.
I'm reminded of winning a city championship in Calgary in hockey at a young age, and one of the prizes being we got to have a practice with the Flames, and I believe Mike Vernon probably put up more of an effort to stop some of our breakaways than whoever that goalie was. Thanks again, Mike. I do appreciate that.
Did you score on Vernon?
Oh, I was the goalie, so I had it the other way around. I had the Flames doing breakaways on me, which was an experience.
Oh my God, Hook and Lube. Here comes Hawk and Lube down the right side.
Would have been one of them, Anyway, that is not the content why people are here.
Joel Otto is in the crease, by the way.
Stead has already logged off and thrown away her computer in disgust.
I want this on the record. Joel Otto is in the crease. All right, go ahead.
I'm not going to tell him that. Okay, where can we start? Jordan, we should probably start you being in the industry you're in. Today, the big announcement was BC finally unveiling a paid sick leave program. It was just announced today, shortly before question period, and the Premier and Labour Minister Harry Bains had a press conference about it a short time ago, hence us taping slightly later than normal. The reaction out there is a little tepid, to be honest. It's 3 days, and the employer can apply for a rebate, and I think it's $200 per day is the cap. 3 days, yes, it's better than what exists now, I guess, if you don't already have coverage from your employer, but I mean, if you've got COVID, it's probably not enough time. Yeah.
Well, there's a few different things here. First of all, slow clap to the NDP for getting this off the ground 14 months after the pandemic started. Like, they weren't exactly rushing filing. God bless them. Horgan tried everything he could to get the feds to pay for this thing. Up to lobbying at every meeting, and even Doug Ford at one point saying, Premier Horgan, he's really working Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, on getting this thing paid for. And of course, that particular GR effort failed miserably. He probably should have hired better GR people than being, simply the Premier. So there's a number of questions here. Look, the devil's always in the details. I think by and large, most employers are understanding of this. We've talked to many of our construction employers who don't have set sick days, but they've been very gracious to staff, working with them when they have symptoms. Obviously, you don't want them coming in. You want them getting the tests. Even people who have had a bad reaction to COVID. I took a sick day because I had a bad reaction to the AstraZeneca. So people, I think the employers have worked through this in the past 14 months. and generally if you're not getting sick days, you would just tweet it out or put it on your Facebook, and pressure would make your boss cave in. So I'm a little surprised that this is still an issue so late into the pandemic. You do wonder, if this had been in place near the beginning, could we have stemmed some of these outbreaks earlier by giving people a reason to stay home sooner, or giving them at least some financial support so when they did, they weren't out of pocket?
I mean, I think even the NDP would probably admit that, yes, a lot of some of the cases we've seen, especially in some of the workplace outbreaks, there could well have been, we could have avoided some of those had there been more incentive to stay home. There were some other things in there that I found curious, and these are not criticisms. These are questions that I haven't seen answered yet. One was that the employer can ask for, I think the phrasing was reasonable proof, but not necessarily a doctor's note. I am legitimately and genuinely curious what that would entail. I genuinely don't know.
I can tell you what that is.
Please.
That is when your mom calls in on your behalf and you're making coughing noises behind. No, you're right about that. One of my little points on this was, ICBA, for example, we don't call our sick days. We have a certain number of personal days that each employee can take. So if you're not feeling well, you take a personal day. And that kind of lifts, a little bit of the embarrassment or discussion around, like, are you going for a doctor's appointment? We've had people use personal days to move or to go for counseling or whatever. At the end of the year, if you haven't used all your personal days, we essentially pay you out 50% of what they're worth. If you've been there all the time, you've saved 4 of your days, we'll pay you out for 2 days bonus. It's not technically sick pay, although some of us do use it for sick days. That also helps if your child is sick, then you don't feel like you're lying to your employer about taking a quote-unquote sick day when it's actually for someone you're giving care for. So, is that included in this personal days? We'll have to look at the legislation and then the regulation that comes out of it after, I guess.
That's actually really interesting. I hadn't even thought about, if someone you're caring for is sick. I've had to stay home before I worked from home, being with a sick child. And so, that is, I guess, technically a sick day, even though I was in perfect health. And your point about what your company does with personal days is interesting to me. I realize this was just announced this morning, and the answer is almost certainly you don't know. But how would that work if you, the employer, has to apply for a rebate from the province? If it's a personal day and you're not asking the employee to specify that they're sick, how? Again, I'm sure your answer is you don't know, and that's fair.
We don't know. Chances are Harry Baines doesn't know. They have it's when you go down the rabbit hole and actually start putting the regulations and the program together. I'm not even sure it would be eligible, or maybe it would be. There's just so much up in the air about it. But again, we've had 14 months of this pandemic. We really these are questions that we should have answered in May 2020, not May 2021. You're right. I found the response online to be very, there was a time, Maclean, in this pandemic, as you'll recall, that nothing Horgan, Dix, and Henry could do was wrong. They were just beloved, and there was festivals, not in the streets because we're not allowed to gather, but there were murals and wonderful comments and, oh, isn't it great? They're taking care of us. Man, those days are gone. Even what should be a fairly good news announcement, albeit late, gets kind of a passing eye roll, and we go on to the next issue.
Yeah, and the one thing it did do from a public relations point of view is it did kind of put pause on the thing we had been talking about since last week and all through the weekend, which was the pandemic data leak. I'm sure if you're watching this, you don't need a recap, but briefly summarized, as someone at the BC Centre for Disease Control leaked a lot of granular pandemic data information to a reporter at the Vancouver Sun. And the problem wasn't even so much that it was leaked, but it contained a lot of information that has not been shared with the public. Now, this would be embarrassing enough, but Premier Horgan himself has invested a lot of political capital into insisting that BC is as transparent as any jurisdiction in Canada or indeed the world, which is, we knew all along that wasn't the case. This was it in black and white, that this is not the case, and at some point a decision was made not to share it, which would be fine, only they kept saying they were in fact sharing it. It's a very odd situation. Yeah,
I agree. Some of the reporters who I've talked to over the years, who I consider some of the nicest human beings around, Justin McElroy, just a genuinely nice human being. Penny Daffos, fantastically nice human being. They clearly fell off the data bandwagon very early on in this. They were asking for things and not receiving them, or it would be couched in other things. It was very clear that data that they wanted and frankly needed in order to give British Columbians a proper context for the risks they were facing wasn't being provided. And the frustration is, comms people, this is very much a comms people debacle here, where you have them holding on to this information because why? We were afraid of singling people out, privacy rights. Well, that was never going to be a question. We didn't want data sets down to the ones and twos in a neighborhood. But in a city like Langley, where I live, 120,000 people, you can give us some stats on Langley more often than you were, and even into neighborhoods. I live in a neighborhood, Walnut Grove, 25,000 people. That is not going to violate anyone's personal privacy. No more than a letter home from school violates someone's personal privacy when it comes to COVID. We've received a bunch of those letters. I'll let you in a secret, Maclean. Virtually every family knows who the people are who came down with the diet but we go through the pretense of personal privacy. So all that was piling on, and it's so bizarre that they would then, the comms solution to the comms decision not to release this was sort of deny that you were hiding anything in the first place. Almost double down, no, what was it Dick said? 100 people had this. What do you mean we were hiding it? 100 people had it.
That's the strangest response.
That was bizarre for a guy who's been generally very, very good at messaging throughout this. 100 people. We're a province of 5 million. Great job. 100 people had the information, so it's public? Come on.
There was a lot. I mean, this is kind of what I wrote about last night, this morning in the Orca, was that it's not even so much that this happened, is that the reaction to it was just to keep insisting that it didn't happen and that it was being shared and that it wasn't a leak when it had been leaked to the media and said not for public distribution on it. And also that this information was being shared, which is just not true. And it put the media in an incredibly uncomfortable position where, they have been, I think, understandably reluctant to criticize Dr. Henry and Dr. Gustafson, not wanting to undermine public confidence in a pandemic. And I completely understand, and I even applaud that. But when they are saying things that are demonstrably not true, it is very awkward. How do you phrase the question other than what you're saying is false without using the L word? And I don't even want to use it here. But it's just an odd situation. And my suggestion, not to spoil my piece, was they could have just said, we made these decisions early on in the pandemic for several reasons, one of which is not wanting to drain human resources, which is still true, but also we didn't want to stigmatize vulnerable populations. And that you might have an implicit admission that maybe they wouldn't do it that way now, but what you're saying is, look, shit was crazy 14 months ago. Okay? We were doing everything we could in real time. And I think the vast majority of people would have been okay, yeah, that's fair. Okay. Maybe I wish you had decided differently, but God only knows I wouldn't have wanted to be in your flu vogs back then, because I certainly wouldn't have. And I will never understand why they didn't say that, why we made these decisions for what we thought were the best reasons at the time, in exactly the same way that we advised against wearing masks in all places at all times. It was the best information we had then. They didn't do that.
Yeah, you're 100% correct on that. Here's what I don't understand. Who made the decision to pull Dix out of that news conference on Friday and just send out Drs. Henry and Gustafson on their own? They're very capable communicators. I'm not doubting that. But this was a political decision. Or if it wasn't a political decision, it should look like a political decision, right?
Yes.
Go out there, Dix, take your beating. It was a Friday afternoon. We would have forgotten it by Saturday, because Saturday was pretty nice in most of the province. Instead, they carried that news over the weekend. It became question period was just shredding them, and the rare question period where both the BC Liberals and the Greens are asking the exact same questions in their own, different styles. It just didn't make sense. Send Dix out to take his beating. He's going to take a beating at some point from the media on this.
Yep.
He's got to look McElroy in the Zoom camera eye and answer the question, right? So you might as well get it over with. So I'll be curious, and I'm sure Bob Mackin has already FOI'd it. I'll be curious what was on Dix's calendar on Friday that he couldn't make himself available, if anything, for that news conference.
Well, I mean, he was going to be in it, and then they did pull him on fairly short notice. And here's the funny thing. I mean, you mentioned Adrian Dix taking a beating from the media. If my life depended on a single press conference where something bad happened and I had to put somebody in front of the camera who was going to talk, never once lose his or her cool, and use a lot of words to say very little, Adrian Dix would be on a very short list of people that I would pick. Which, that's going to sound like a criticism. It is not. It is actually praise. The man, the very first time I interviewed him, he bragged that he was unclippable to me. It is a little funny aside. And then, he was unclippable. He takes pride in this, and he's very good at it. And this would have been the time that you put those skills to use.
Yeah.
He could have gotten up there and he could have, used very many words to basically sort of say nothing and then, leave everyone confused. And again, not a criticism. I do not understand why they wouldn't have done that, as you say, especially on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah, you're right about Adrian Dix. In fact, if you're a communications person or you want to know how politicians can communicate or should communicate, go back to the 2013 election. You have two politicians, Christy Clark and Adrian Dix, who are as disciplined on message as far as politicians come. They were at the top of their game in that election cycle, and they were singularly focused for, I've talked to Christy about this, the tape recorder in your head, bridging back to your original message, and, debt-free BC, LNG, all those things, economic prosperity, jobs, like always bridging back to that message over and over and over again, even when no one believed it, even when she was down 15 points to the poll, she did it. Conversely, Adrian Dix, same thing. He was playing that campaign safe. He was not going to get into the mud in any way, nothing negative, and he was, basically kind of setting himself up like it'd been so long since the NDP had been in power. We can be in power again and not be scary, essentially. And he kind of went back. It's two incredibly disciplined, as far as message goes, politicians, expressing that discipline in very different ways. One with the charisma and the smile and the bright eyes and can light up a room when she walks in, and one with this excruciating minutia of competence and as many words as possible. It's a fascinating thing about message discipline, that whole election.
Speaking of message discipline, do we want to talk about, did you watch Question Period today, I guess is the better way of putting it. You may not have had a chance.
I did not. I followed along on the tweets, and I hear there were shenanigans.
Yeah, it's one of those things that in better times, it would have been fascinating to be there in person because you see everything. And but essentially what happened, as far as we could tell on TV and through tweets and that afterwards, was that Surrey White Rock MLA, BC Liberal, Trevor Halford, was asking a question about overdose deaths, and he was referencing the 12-year-old who lost her life. And he mentioned that he has two 12-year-olds at home, and he got a little emotional. And again, it's on Zoom, so it's hard to say, but there was apparently some heckling on the other side, and he told the Attorney General to stop smirking. And anyway, it skipped to the end of question period. Minister Nicholas Simons got up, apologized for using an unparliamentary word, which he then withdrew. And then Attorney General David Eby rose on a point of personal privilege, saying that, the member said we were all smirking, or I was smirking rather, but we were all wearing masks, so there's no way he could have known. At which point the speaker said, well, the minister did say something pretty unparliamentary, so let's all just drop this and be better from now on, because as he put it, people are watching us.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting that he kind of just swatted aside the Attorney General's point of personal privilege, like, you know what, let's not do that. It's not clear what was said. It sounds as though the word that Simons might have used was liar, which I don't know that, just judging from some tweets and some clarifications that have been going out there, which, if true, is A, you can't say that, but also when you're talking about someone's, connection as a parent and, talking about a 12-year-old who lost her life to overdose, it's just, what are you doing? And you're a minister. So, but he did withdraw. Anyway, it just sort of goes to show that a lot happens in question period that we don't see. And man, that was an ugly exchange today.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the minister should be kind of ashamed of himself for swatting at anything. Like, I get you don't like question period as a minister. You kind of dread it. I assume that unless you're you love the conflict like Eby does. But generally, most of these ministers would prefer not to be questioned in question period, I think.
Yeah.
you're talking about a 12-year-old 12-year-old little girl, in Victoria, I believe, who died of an overdose. Just be sad. Show human emotion. Just separate yourself from the fact that, they're asking a question about, how do you prevent that from happening again? And, the truth is, you can do a lot of things, but you can't safeguard every 12-year-old in the province. Things may happen again, unfortunately. But just be sad, be empathetic, be sympathetic. What is the problem with that? And it does show then, I think, it makes me question some of the moral fiber then of people who don't in that situation. I get it, you want to defend, but that's a moment for regret, for quiet, for contemplation, not for pseudo-smirking, whether it's a mask or not. And look, you can tell a lot from people by their eyes. It's not a time for heckling. It's a 12-year-old little girl.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't in the room, so I have no idea who said what or who smirked what. All we know is that the Minister Simons did stand up and say he did say something unparliamentary, and he did withdraw it, to be fair. But yes, you're right. This was not a subject for heckling, and you are kind of disappointed watching, being like, really, guys, look, this is the one thing that we could probably do without the heckling on. And
you and I, we've talked about this before, I'm not afraid of the heckling. I'm not bothered by heckling in the House. I think it's part of the theater of the political spectrum, the Westminster system. But there are times for heckling, there are times for not heckling. Yeah. That was a time to not. And kudos to the Speaker, who obviously an NDP MLA, from right here in Burnaby, by the way, who, called out his, NDP colleagues, and for their behavior. And I appreciate that, and that's good. And now they'll move on to the next issue. And I'm sure everyone will be a little bit more, hopefully a little bit more sensitive to what the actual content of the question is, rather than just a reflex, you're a BC Liberal, so we hate you, and therefore we're going to ridicule you.
If you don't watch BC politics regularly, Minister Nicola Simons from Powell River Sunshine Coast is one of the most interesting figures in that, outside the realm of politics, you will never meet someone who is an easier smile or sort of a more go along to get along. He's very friendly, and yet I cannot think of a more prolific heckler at any level of government that I've ever seen. And it's hard to square the two on occasion. And I mean, he'll be the first one to tell you this. He jokes about his heckling all the time. I think he's just got an incredibly short fuse. And it's different when you're a minister, is all I will say. And it's something to watch.
Yeah, you're right on that. So, yeah, like I said, hopefully cooler heads will prevail. Look, no one's perfect in this. I remember a BC Liberal minister. There was a case where a young girl in care died, or her mother died, and she was there with the body for quite a period of time. And as a minister, I think the temptation is you reflexively go back to protecting your ministry, protecting the frontline workers, the procedures, what was followed, what wasn't. But that's not what the case often calls for in the first few moments. The first few moments are about empathy, sympathy. To his credit, Adrian Dix and Dr. Henry have done 200 press conferences. That's 200 times they've stood up. And probably 195 of them said, 3 people have lost their life, 5 people have lost their life to COVID. And there's always a little hitch there, a moment where they do take the time. It's not perfunctory, even though it happens in every one of those press conferences. On behalf of the Premier and British Columbians everywhere, we extend our sympathy and our condolences. It would be very easy for that just to be a throwaway thing, but there is that moment of, it centers them almost like, this is a good reminder, this thing kills, and these are real people who have lost someone, and we got to make sure. So it's a fine line. It's a fine line, but clearly, the shenanigans,
and you're right.
They crossed
That's actually a really good point to raise, is that Minister Dix and Dr. Henry do deserve credit for that, because it would be very easy for that to become routine. And I can also understand if even just subconsciously, they're seeing this part in their notes and you desperately want to skip ahead to the next thing as fast as possible because it's not about death. And so you could, even if you, for the right intentions, go through it as fast as you can just because you want to for yourself. But they've never done that, at least never once that I've seen. They always do have, exactly as you say, that little pause, just taking a breath and letting the gravity of what they just said sink in. I mean, yesterday it was, I believe, 20 deaths that were announced over the 3 days before. And I mean, one is a lot, too many. But yeah, it's worth pointing out. I mean, we did start by saying something they did that we disagree with, and so it is worth mentioning once in a while the stuff that they have done right from the beginning, and we don't talk about enough.
Yeah, you're exactly right. There's lots. Yeah, we call it boilerplate in the business, right? The things that you constantly. It would be easy for that just to become part of the boilerplate, but it's not. And kudos to them for not just making it part of the bland recitation of stats and numbers.
Yeah. I will also, this might be the last thing we talk about today. You'll remind me if I have forgotten something, but a couple weeks ago, I believe it was the episode before last, you became a prophet. I don't know if you'll remember this. And you said that there will be almost no news, if any, maybe none, on the BC Liberal leadership front until after the long weekend. And lo, Jordan, 7 days has gone by since our last show, and absolutely nothing has happened. At least nothing above surface that I've seen.
Yeah, no, it's very quiet out there. I think campaigns are sort of putting together their pieces. I think there's probably in the heart of hearts of a couple people considering, is this all going to be worth it? Should I really do it? I suspect that will lead right through the May long weekend. It wouldn't surprise me if we had a candidate or two who we've long considered running take a walk in the snow, so to speak, in the May long weekend, a walk in the sunshine, and come to the conclusion that, what am I, crazy? Great. So I give up a year of my life to become BC Liberal leader, and then I have 2 years of rebuilding, so I have a chance, slim chance to become premier. Is this really worthwhile? What are my priorities going forward? I think that's happening now. Not to say I've heard that anyone's dropping out. It's just the natural ebb and flow of politics. It's easy to make plans and to start setting things up. It's really hard to turn the key.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, there are three types of candidates in any leadership race. There are the type people who think they're going to win, self-explanatory. There's the people who think that they probably won't win, but they will. It's an excellent chance to raise their profile, dozens of examples. And then you have a third kind that it's almost like, I was going to say suicide mission. That's a terrible phrase, but they're there to prove a point of some kind. And they have no intention of winning. They just want to get up there. And that point can mean positive or negative. But I'm thinking of someone like Dana Larson in 2011 for the NDP. He had no chance of winning. He was there to further the cause of legalizing marijuana. And he would be the first one to tell you that. And there's lots of other examples like that. So, yes, if you can't accomplish any one of those three goals, it is a good time to have your walk in the snow and pull the key out of the ignition.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, one other thing that I correctly predicted. In BC, the $500 million, we shouldn't call it a slush fund, but we'll call it corporate welfare fund that the NDP have set up here. You'll recall I was very concerned that there would be NDP ties and influences to it. You'll notice the board of directors has Carol James, former NDP finance minister. Now, Carol, very capable, but not going to quibble so much with her, but a long list of other NDP supporters and donors. And lo and behold, for an agency that's supposed to be completely separate from government and not reliant or not dependent on the political whims of the government, we have two deputy ministers in that group, on that board, who can be fired, my understanding is, by really only one person in all of British Columbia, and that would be the premier. It doesn't get much more connected than that. I'm sure they'll bring interesting ideas to the table, but that makes me kind of question how you can be independent when you have firing authority over two of the board members.
Well, to sum up, Vaughn Palmer, only a cynic, sir, would suggest that having political control over this $500 million fund until after the next scheduled election, only a cynic would even think that, would even entertain that thought, that this will be political in any way for the intervening 5 years. That's just simply not something that enters into these people's minds.
These funds almost never work. This is what frustrates me, right? Like, they've tried this all over the place in various different ways. Canadian Infrastructure Bank being a great example, for example. They never work. Like, they bet on, they often bet on issues or companies that are more about issues or causes than they are about, making a profit and returning money to the investor. That's the people. So I'm just very skeptical of NBC. Still don't have a business plan. Still not releasing any information as to what they're doing with this money. They have $500 million. They've had it throughout the pandemic. They haven't helped a single business yet. What are the timelines? Who's responsible? I'm uncomfortable with this whole thing.
I think that's all I have for in my barrel this week.
I have
unless you've got
breaking
some
news.
other.
Breaking
What's
news
that?
here. I just have a little
Breaking
piece of
news.
breaking news. COVID breaking news. If you are a construction worker in Vancouver Coastal Health or Fraser Health Authority, so basically everywhere from Hope all the way up into Squamish, Sunshine Coast, the government's or the PHO has just announced that you are now considered a frontliner and you are eligible to get your COVID vaccine. So talk to your employer. They should have information from our association and other associations are part of, and they will give you a code and you can get your Pfizer or your Moderna booked, and off you go. Let's get vaccinated.
That's great news. That just came through now?
Just came through this late this morning or very early afternoon. We'd heard some rumblings about it yesterday, and it is exciting. You know, obviously construction continued on throughout the pandemic.
Yep.
You know, by and large, considering the number of people working in construction, very safe. A few outbreaks here or there, like on any job site. But generally,
every industry has had them.
Exactly. Generally, when you consider masks and all these other things, it's been helpful. Now they want to get these folks vaccinated in order to take away another spot where COVID can spread, and we're encouraging all of our members to go and do that. We have heard, there was a couple of sites that had outbreaks and they did have vaccinations done, and we're told that the vast majority, something like 98, 99% of the workers accepted the vaccination, which is great news.
That's great.
There's a handful who didn't for whatever reason, and it's a personal choice. I'm not going to criticize you for that, but the more folks who can do it, the quicker we get to herd immunity, and the quicker we can open up, and like Russia, and go see our prime minister or our president score 8 goals in a game like Vladimir Putin.
Well, we don't have a president, but if we did, I'm sure they could not match that Herculean feat. I mean, that's a great bookend, right? Yeah, ending with some good news and starting with, a legendary Olympian feat on the ice, something that we can all take pride.
I saw a hilarious tweet claiming that it must have been Donald Trump in that. But I can't possibly comment.
The best part about doing the show is that I know, and don't name any names, but I know there will be people out there who will say that, who will take my introduction literally and make it sound as though I was praising Vladimir Putin like I was some North Korean newsreader. I love the internet. Never change.
Never change, internet, never change.
Until next week, he's Jordan Bateman. I'm Maclean K. Happy politics.